Hi, I'm Nicola.
And I'm Jay Percy.
And welcome to the Afro-Animist Podcast.
We are two animists and spiritual practitioners exploring the secular through the spiritual, discussing life experiences through a sacred lens.
Each week we share our experiences and dive deep into everything in life, from philosophy, metaphysics, obeah, occultism, shamanism, culture, healing, nature, animism,
the arts, pop culture, conspiracies, psychedelics and witchcraft. Nothing is off the table in these discussions, which aim to get to the heart of what it means to be spiritual and Afro-diasporic in an increasingly sterile and authoritarian world.
We keep it real whilst exploring the biggest mysteries of our multiverse. Join us holding this space to laugh, cry, debate, build community and tear down oppressive structures.
Welcome, you beautiful, beautiful beings of the multiverse to the Afro-Animist Podcast. And I'm Jay Percy.
And I'm Nicola Roth. And this week we have an absolutely amazing, super interesting guest for you.
Yes, we are talking with Sena Voncujovi, who is an absolutely impressive human being. And this is actually a take 2, or maybe even a take 3 now.
Yeah.
Because the first 2 attempts haven't been technically the most accurate, but going forward, this should be nice and easy, one would hope.
Yes.
And he's such an impressive human being. We definitely had to have his presence here on the show because what he has to talk about is so very important, and I really hope it inspires our listeners of the African diaspora to delve deeper into their own initiatory practices and look towards those. So I'll go ahead and introduce. Since birth, Sena has been immersed in the West African Ewe spiritual and herbal traditions of Vodu. He has actively practiced Vodu and Afa as a Hano and Boko, respectively, for the past 14 years. His father, Christopher Voncujovi, runs a traditional shrine, African Magic Temple in Accra, Ghana, which I will definitely be visiting.
Oh, yeah.
He currently lives in Tokyo as a diviner. As a third-generation diviner, Sena founded Vodu Education in 2015 to preserve and demystify Vodu digitally and educate the world about its wisdom. 3 Revolution, Sena has produced 6 educational short films, built a virtual community of over 30,000 followers in over 50 countries, and delivered several lectures at leading universities in the United States, Japan, China, Europe, and Africa. He graduated from Middlebury College, US, where he studied international politics, economics, and African studies. He also pursued his master's in China studies at Peking University, exploring China's modernized traditional Chinese medicine practice and its relevance to traditional African medicine and medical philosophy related to Vodu practice. His thesis on the same topic was awarded for the Baoping African Studies Thesis Distinction Prize in 2022 by Peking University. With this knowledge, he hopes to learn how African countries can also integrate traditional medicine and healers into their healthcare systems. He speaks English and Japanese fluently, is conversant in French and Spanish, and is currently studying Mandarin. He is on a mission to use nature-based African spiritual practice to awaken public consciousness about the validity of indigenous African spiritual and herbal ways of life in modern time, especially among people of African descent. Like I said, impressive, and I feel like, Sena, you've lived a million lives in this one quite short life. So how do you spiritually identify?
How do I spiritually identify? That's a good question. I identify, I guess, as a practitioner and a diviner and priest of Vodu, which is from the Ewe people of West Africa and present-day Ghana, Togo, and some parts of Benin. And the 2 disciplines, broadly speaking, that I practice are Vodu and also Afa, which is kind of a root of or a descendant of the Yoruba Orisha-based practice of Ifa, which uses Orishas and things like that. The Ibe people have their version, which they learned from the Yorubas originally, but customized to fit Ibe standards, called Afa. And so that's what I use as my divination tool. And what I employ as the helpers or my partners are these Vodus that I work with that have been working with Ewe people of West Africa for centuries or millennia.
What I think so fascinating about that is it seems African spiritual religions or traditions, they have this way of evolving and adapting to the people as they need it. We're Obia practitioners, as we do hope you know. And the Obia that we practice in the Caribbean, of course, is going to be very different from the Obia of the Akan, because it has moved with how the tribes have been, were taken from their homes and then sort of smushed together in the most catastrophic way possible. So it's really quite fascinating hearing you say that Afa comes from that place, but they've sort of slightly customized it to the people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when people think of traditional African practices, they think of it as something that is static and doesn't change. But then the practice, the only traditional thing is that it's not part of the mainstream religions. And in fact, it's something that has always changed to suit the people. And a good example of that is even the transatlantic slave trade. When people from West Africa were sent from West Africa to the New World in America and in the Caribbean, they were met with different kinds of herbs and different kinds of plants and different realities and different challenges, and different languages. And so the practice, primarily was a practice of resistance, a practice of being able to solve problems, whether that's health problems, whether that's social problems, or even familial problems. They had to adapt to what the reality was there and what herbs they had available there and what languages the people spoke, and that's exactly how it's being practiced even today. So it's not really traditional. It's very it evolves with the time. 10 years ago we couldn't do readings over the phone or over the internet. Now we can.
Yeah.
But honestly, it's always so comforting to hear this, but especially comforting to hear this, knowing how much time and effort that, this takes up your life. And I think that's the most beautiful thing to understand about African spirituality, is it's moved with the diaspora as the diaspora has had to move. Just lovely to hear. So what spurred you into practicing what you currently practice?
I would say the biggest influence has no doubt been my father. My father has been on this journey for 40, 50 years now. He started off in a Christian family and moved into Hinduism at an early age. He practiced that for about 10 years as a Hindu Tantra yogi. Left that and was traveling around Asia, and then eventually made his roots back to his Vodu practice, which was a practice of his great-grandfathers and his grandfathers, but his father directly did not really practice, so he didn't really know. He knew he came from that sort of background, but he didn't really practice until he was much older. And so through his practice, he realized that, that spirituality, which, of course, there are a lot of, East Asian practices that are very renowned and very popular. And he left his home country to go and study in Asia to try and learn this spiritual truth, if you may. But then he realized that truth that he's been looking for has always been in Africa and has been around him. And he just wasn't looking, or he had been brainwashed to think that it was bad. And so our family moved back to Ghana. He started the Shrine African Magic Temple, and we've been running now for 26 years. And so Revolution, really the project that I started, is kind of the educational branch of the shrine. And the shrine is actually a working shrine that takes clients and does spiritual consultation and services for people all over the world today. So that, I mean, observing that was an inspiration to me. But the interesting thing was my father never really forced me into practicing anything. He at some point in my life, I was even an atheist because I went to a Ghanaian school, and a Ghanaian British school, which was a Christian school, if you may. You had to say the Lord's Prayer every day. We had religious education, Bible study, and I didn't really feel comfortable with some of the close-minded views towards my practices in the class, even by some of my teachers. And so I really did not like religion, and I, the concept of science made more sense to me at the time. Mind you, I'm 11, 12, 13 at the time.
Yeah.
I remember very clearly that my father didn't even, when I told him my views, he was very supportive and he didn't say anything. He was just kept doing what he was doing, and gave me the space, because I think he has the philosophy that an individual spiritual practice is an individual decision. It's not something that whether it's your parent or your community should coerce you into doing. And that is the best way for if somebody is going to have some sort of spiritual awakening to arrive at that, it needs to come from within and by themselves, not something that you force on them. So he never forced me. And then when I was in my teens, I got introduced to working with spirits directly. And then that changed my whole worldview of what is there and what our ancestors used to do, and what my father actually has spent a lot of his time doing. And I've been doing that now for about 13, 14 years. And so that's what's brought me on my journey so far, I would say.
Wow, I think it's really, really amazing that your father, I mean, from the sounds of him, obviously he's an explorer and an adventurer, and a very open-minded person. I think it's so good that he didn't force any kind of practice on you, and allowed you to kind of find your way, because I feel like that is one of the biggest things for people when they kind of feel a bit lost. Like, so over here feeling, like the God we're given over here is the Christian God, and if that doesn't work for you, then you're kind of a little bit pushed out and lost. So I think that's a really beautiful thing. What after you had your period of atheism and science making more sense, which I had that as well, where I just was like, science is what kind of makes the most sense, until I had more kind of in-depth spiritual experience. What was it about the practice when you started? Because you've said a little bit, it changed. It obviously, once you had started practicing, it changed your worldview. But what was it about the practice? What was it about the experience that changed that for you?
Yeah, so right now, I think a lot of people have the perception or the view that like science and this deep spiritual practice are at odds with each other. I don't think that to be the case. I think it's science that tries to explain what is, and so maybe in the future we may have more advanced capabilities to explain what happens in what we do, right? And so I don't think that science and spiritual practice are at odds with each other, especially now. But then, what is it about the practice? I think it's about how do you know, right? So, for example, the divination. You go to when I was in my teens, I got introduced to Ifa divination, where you go to the old man in the bush who doesn't speak in English, and we'll go with my Japanese mother, who also doesn't speak any Ewe. And so somebody has to translate. But then in the divination, he would be able to very vividly give us details about how my Japanese ancestors were buried, and the things that were put inside of the grave or in the coffin buried with them, with such vivid detail that I didn't even know at the time, because I'd never been to a Japanese funeral. But then my diviner is able to see this. It's an Ewe man, the late Tobe Dafli. So, and he's telling this to my mother and telling her about what her ancestors are telling him. And she's confirming everything that he is saying. He's speaking to Ewe, to my father, and my father is translating it Japanese and English to my mother. And so
Uh-huh.
it made me expand my view about the ways of knowing, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
there's many ways of knowing, and there are also distinctly African ways of knowing and knowledge systems that are completely independent of the scientific paradigm that we have created, which is a very useful paradigm, but it's not able to explain everything, especially not in the context of African realities and African worldviews.
For sure.
And these sorts of encounters, which is not one encounter. This became a daily practice, and also it's an art, right? It's not just a religion or a faith-based practice. It's a knowledge-based practice, and it's an art. You need to get better at it. You need to study, and
Mm.
there's a whole system that is in place which has been going on for centuries of how to train one's spiritual self in these disciplines to become better and to become useful to society. And so observing these things, all that really shifted my worldview, and it made me think that I want to dedicate a significant part of my time doing this, and building initiatives to educate people about this, and also help people who actually want to practice
Uh-huh.
effectively.
Uh-huh. Wow. I was looking at last night your documentary, Like a Knife,
Mm,
and I found it so interesting. Just seeing, obviously I've read about it and heard you speak about it a bit, but just kind of having that visual documentary,
mm,
hearing your father speak and the ideas about, like you've spoken about, obviously the movement of these traditions and the evolution of these traditions, and in that they change when people move or the need is different. And I found it really interesting, you guys talking about that in the documentary, kind of about the modernization of the African traditional religions. And I just wonder kind of like what that looks like for you. So if you were modernizing, if you're bringing this forward into this time now and what your people need now, how is that different from what your father does?
Yeah, so I think it's not maybe a big difference between what my father and what I would do, but it's more
Uh-huh.
on just general access and how the practice is changing. And they're also influenced by global forces, right? So I
Hmm.
think, for example, one of the biggest things that I see is a significant number of diasporan practitioners. By diasporan, I mean people of African descent that are living outside of the continent of Africa, or who
Hmm.
are historically of African descent, who are really searching for this sort of information. And the digital revolution in the past 10, 15 years, and significant, you know, increases in digital access to internet and things like this have given platforms for practitioners to be connected, and I think that is
Hmm.
huge. It's huge
Yeah.
because before we had practitioners that were just isolated even within Ghana. And so
Hmm.
people always felt very ostracized. And of course, this practice is a very ostracized practice even today in contemporary Africa, everywhere. Everybody sees it
Hmm.
as a negative thing. And so having that virtual community is really able to create that mental support for people and create that platform for exchanging authentic information. Of course, we have to be careful about the frauds and all of these things, but it's a huge opportunity to be able to preserve this information in this
Hmm.
time. The way the practice already, as I mentioned, we do divination using the phone, because somebody's sound waves are able to travel through and go into the oracle can still decipher that information. But then
Hmm.
maybe 10 years ago, people didn't do that, and people may not have even tested the system to see if the system will be able to do it. It's a trial and error thing. There are things that
Yeah.
you haven't done before, and you try it and you see it, and you analyze it within the practice and see why it should work or why it shouldn't. and but you can never really know if it'll work or if it doesn't work until you try it. And when you keep trying it and you're able to do it consistently without fail 100%, then you can adopt that as a system that works. And that's how I would say almost all practices have been created.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing that it is being brought into the technological age like this. So we, like you said, we can be having these conversations and spreading this information. I think that's why we've both respectively started our channels, right? To make sure that, you know, these conversations are being had, and to stop the demonization and vilification of these practices. How do you go about battling that stigma of the demonization of your practice?
I think so. What we have done is create educational films, and we have a weekly live Q&A session from the shrine where we do live for about 3.5 hours, answering any questions that people have. We have done educational shrine tours for people who are visiting, including diasporan people coming. Most recently, we gave a tour to about 12 to 13 scholars from the US, called the Birthright Africa team, together with the singer Jidena, when they came to Ghana, to give them a tour and of our shrine and an introduction to Vodu practice. So this is what we've done in terms of public education, but we don't really want to put our time and effort in fighting or arguing with people for the sake of arguing, because it doesn't really make any sense, because sometimes you can't really convince anybody who doesn't want to be convinced, and that's not really the point. The point is not proselytizing or trying to increase the number of practitioners. The point is trying to give resources and training to those who already want to learn, because there are enough people who want to learn, and it's better for us to put our time and efforts building things for them than putting our time arguing with people who do not want to practice or want to tell us that we're devil practitioners.
Yeah. when you know something from the inside, it kind of takes away that need to argue or fight, because when someone comes back and says, you know, this is the way things are, you're like, okay, if that's what you want to live by, good for you. You can go and find your people elsewhere. Yeah, I really, that really resonates, especially in an age where we are online, and you will have people going out of their way to tell you what you're doing is particularly you know, evil, whatever. I'm sure you've like many of us practitioners here have had people sliding into the DMs telling us we need Jesus, or
Classic.
Personal favorite of mine. So what have you learned about yourself, like who you are as a person, through your spirituality?
That's a very good and a very deep question, but I would answer it again similar to how I answered first, but I have gone deep to learn more about my destiny, right? And it's a work in progress. Even if you are a priest, it's not something that you can just immediately just know. You can get a blueprint of it, and they can give a lot of anecdotes and a lot of specific guidelines. And you know, I've discovered more details about what the soul is, and how that soul is related to your destiny, and within every practice, the destiny, or what we call se, is predetermined, in that it exists before the physical body even comes, right? And everybody has one, and it comes with a unique purpose and a unique mission, and it chooses everything that one is to come and experience in this world, for sure, right? And so both the hardships and both the positive things, all of these things are influenced by our destiny, and in fact predetermined by our destiny. And by that I mean, in some people's destiny, they are going to live a long life, and some people are going to live a very short life. Some people may have a traumatic death. Some people will have challenges in their romantic life. Whatever it is that you are experiencing in your life, both the good and the bad, it is all influenced by your destiny. And so the more you are able to come closer to this spiritual inner self of yours, and you're able to communicate to it, and you are able to let it guide you in your life, you are able to understand what is your path, that was in many ways predetermined even before you even came into this world. And what are you going to do, and what are the things that you will do that will be in your highest purpose, and what are the things that you will do that will actually hinder your progress, and will lead you to, terminate some of your purpose earlier than you should, because the negative manifestation is always part of the positive manifestation. There's no positive without negative. So it's about being able to understand what actions you would do that would invite that positivity rather than the negative. So that's the kind of self-introspection that we gain from working with our destiny, and we get to these insights through divination that gives us very specific guidelines on things we should be eating, actions we should be taking, what kind of even romantic relationships that we should be involved in, what foods we should be eating, what rituals we should be doing, which ancestors we should be venerating, in order to guide us and overcome our day-to-day challenges.
I need a reading badly.
I was just going to say, I need a reading. I need you to answer every single one of those questions for me.
No, really, I think we come into this world and we're told there's no guidebook, and the only guidebook that you have is the Bible. And really, if we have these sorts of opportunities to experience this at a younger age, perhaps so many more of us would be on the right path, instead of chasing our tails into oblivion, which it can feel like sometimes.
It's very interesting. It's very, very interesting, even we as priests. And this is where the deity Afa comes into play. Have you guys heard of Ifa?
I've heard, yes, of course. I was in a Lakumi choir, so I'm very familiar with Ifa.
Yes. So Ifa, in our practice, we call Afa, is, in other words, people call it the deity of divination, but it's also the deity of destiny, right? As the deity of destiny, because when people get initiated into Ifa, they get a blueprint of why, or of what they came, like the kind of spiritual code that they came into this world with, according to Afa literature, right? And these things give very specific guidelines on to the individual. And oftentimes when you get it, sometimes people don't understand or people don't agree with it. But then if it's done properly, exactly what is in your destiny, there's no way you can run away from it. There are some people that are not born to be entrepreneurial, where they're not supposed to start businesses on their own. They're supposed to work for other people, and that's going to be the best thing for them. Whereas there are other people who actually, if they're working for people, that's going to be terrible for their success, and they actually need to be alone. There are certain people that have specific professions that they need to do, and no other profession will be good for them. It really is a work in progress. It's a process of self-discovery. And so when you get initiated into Ifa, you get that blueprint. And that's why Ifa initiation traditionally in Ebe society was very important. parents will initiate their children into Ifa as early as 3-4 years old, sometimes 6 years old, just to be able to find more information and insight to know how to guide that child to be able to make them successful ultimately.
Wow.
So what can your clients, I don't know if that's the right word, expect when they receive a reading from you outside of the initiatory practices?
So outside of the initiatory practices, the reading usually is done where you first get on a call,
Mm-hmm.
and then you will explain what it is you're trying to find out about. And this is where you'll play out. I'll be on the phone at first, and then I'll put the phone on top of the oracle, and then you can speak on the oracle in whatever language that you choose, what you're trying to find out about. And then when that is done, we will now do the reading. I will do the reading, and then I'll get back to you, and I will send you a report of about 3 to sometimes up to 5 pages. If it's short, about 3, where we go into dietary guidelines, behavioral guidelines, spiritual guidelines, and some causes and roots and stories and certain guidelines that you should follow, and the problems that are associated with what fell in the reading. And then we will have another call where we can debrief and have a conversation over the phone or over WhatsApp on what came out in the reading, and then again, why you came to do the consultation.
So incredibly involved. I think that just sounds so thorough, and I can imagine that if you're receiving this reading, that you're going to feel so heard and catered to.
Yeah, it's very useful to some people. It's useful to most people that do it. And I myself have been on the receiving end of readings for myself or through other diviners, and it's useful to get clarity. Another option for people, which I can recommend for people, is if there's a very big issue that you're trying to find out, not just try and understand a few things, small minor things, but a very serious issue. It's a good idea to get divination from more than one diviner that you trust. So you can go to 2, 3, and then see how what they all say align. And usually if they are very good diviners, what they say would really align in a very fascinating way that you'll be like, okay, this is the message.
Yeah. I do. I love divination. I think it's such a brilliant tool when it's needed. Nikki, do you remember the first reading I gave to you? It was around you wanting to do all of these big things in your life, and then but at the moment you're going through change in your home situation. You're like, yep, I'm literally building a tiny house right now.
Yeah.
Get that out of the way before you can put into place those big changes.
What
oh my gosh.
What kind of reading?
Yes.
Well, within Obia, it was of course a practice within the within Caribbean Obia. You will tend to use what you have to hand. So with our mentor would suggest shells. So either spiral shells or cowrie shells. I myself have adapted my own reading kit to it's got shells in there. It's there's like I've got nutmeg in there, like a literal seed of nutmeg, and then a couple of other items that I've been gifted by the earth along the way. And it's a throwing practice. So you throw these items, and depending on where they land, it gives you a direction as to what's going on in that person's life. Of course, there's some details I probably can't go into too much on a podcast with loads of people listening, because once again, it's an initiatory practice, but it's mainly, you're mainly throwing, and depending on where it lands, that gives you indications of what's going on in that person's life.
Wow, that's fascinating. Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm. And Jay is amazing at it. She really is. She's got an amazing skill and connection. I forgot about that reading, and
I haven't
it has
done
all
any
come
for
to
a while.
pass. You need to get back on it, my darling. I do as well. We'll do it together.
This conversation, Sena, honestly is so inspiring.
Seriously, I'm about to jump
Yeah.
on a plane to Ghana.
He's in Tokyo at the moment, love.
No, I know, but I'm going to get you to come over to Ghana too. I want to meet your dad. Go to the temple.
Yes, please. That would be great. So maybe Japan is also very cool.
We did want to ask you some questions about heritage, because so what struck me about you first was obviously your practice, and what I found so like mind-blowing second of all is your, am I correct in saying biracial, mixed race? How would you identify?
Yeah, mixed race, biracial, both of them are fine. I'm Ghanaian Japanese.
Ghanaian Japanese, and I know both indigenous practices there put an emphasis on ancestral veneration, so I can see where it meshes quite well.
That
How have you managed to like integrate both sides of that heritage to move forward with what you're doing?
I think that there's a surprising complementarity that goes between Japanese and African indigenous spiritual practices, much more than, for example, Japanese and Abrahamic or African and Abrahamic practices. And I am talking about worldviews, right? And because that's what we have to think about, right? It's about worldviews. It's about what is the predominant worldview you're operating under, and within that worldview, what is the role of ancestors or local deities or whatever. And right now in Africa, with the predominant worldview, which is an Abrahamic influence and a Eurocentric influence worldview, which doesn't believe in spirit, or if it does believe in spirit, it believes in spirit from a certain geographic location, from a specific religion. And so the Japanese practice, which looks at ancestral veneration as well as nature-based spirit worship, and Voodoo practice, which does basically identical, the same thing. It just perfectly fits. My Japanese ancestors would come through in divination, in my reading, in my African reading, through the Oracle of Afa. And that will be the same case for even some of my clients that are here in Japan, where I've observed the pattern that for a lot of Japanese people, their ancestors tend to come up in readings much more predominantly, and that has to be related to the long ancestral traditions and practices that have been sustained even to today.
It's so good that you're able to find resolve in both of them. We're of course mixed race as well. We both possess varying wild identities, which I'm sure we could list off for days as Caribbeans.
Yeah.
What are you guys?
Say that again,
first,
Sena?
Nikki.
What was the question?
Where are you from?
So my dad is English, and my mum's family is from Jamaica, and that's as much as I really know. So my mother was born here, but her parents came over from Jamaica in the 60s. And some of my family have done DNA tests. I haven't done one as of yet. And that is coming back as I think is expected, mostly West African, I think. So I think Benin and Togo, and maybe a bit of Yoruba. But yeah, I don't personally, this is why I was desperate to find a tradition that was closer to my ancestry, and finding the Obio was super, super important for me, because it's been a struggle. There's been so much movement of my family and people that actually, to be able to find the connection, to be able to find the teachings to the African traditions has been really difficult. It's felt like something that's been quite out of my reach for a lot of my life, and it's only kind of coming to me now. And I'm so inspired by it. It makes me want to, listening to you, Senna, literally makes me want to do so much more exploration. It's beautiful. Where are you from, Jay?
Mix up.
You're mix up.
Yeah, I all four of my grandparents are multi-heritage. So my both of my parents are mixed race, with my mum being multi-generational, my dad being biracial, I guess. I guess. His my father's father is Jamaican and Indian, and my father's mother is Swedish and Scottish, and Irish. And on my mum's side, and I always list these out because all four of them are very vehement about specifying heritage and ancestry. Even the Scottish Swedish ones, like Scottish, Swedish, Irish, we know where we come from. Okay. And on my mum's side, my mum's mum is Afro-Antiguan and Portuguese Antiguan, and my mum's father is he's multi-generational mixed, and we think he is Antiguan. He keeps telling us he's from this town, and every time we Google it, it doesn't exist on maps. So thanks, Granddad.
They always do stuff like this to us. My granny would do stuff like that all the time, and I'd just be like, there's no way to find out unless you have them literally take you and guide you to the actual place.
Do you know what I mean? But I've done a DNA test, and I am 65% West, North, and South African. So that's a bit of a long way of saying I'm very violently Caribbean.
Where in West you're from?
Sorry?
You know where in West Africa? Did they specify where in West?
Yes, it's 21% Nigerian, and then largely after that it's Ghana, Benin, Togo, Koza, and funnily enough, Guanche, which is like Balearic Islands, which I was very amazed about that. But what I found really fascinating is my granddad for years had sort of told my dad, and my dad had just been saying, oh yeah, we're Maroons, we're Jamaican Maroons. And I always took this as a bit of like, oh yeah, sure, everyone from Jamaica wants to be a Maroon. It's just like the thing you want to be, right? These people, resistors. But after doing this DNA test, some DNA popped up in Nova Scotia in Canada, but it was specifically Nigerian in Nova Scotia. And I thought, that's weird. I don't have anyone who I know who's come from Canada. And then a couple of years go by, I'm doing research into Queen Nanny, really deep diving because I'm doing workshops on this. And then I start to research the tribes that she led in the Blue Mountains. And one of the tribes, the Kojo tribe, which was one of her brothers, once all of the treaties were signed between the British and the Maroons, basically saying you can have land, but you have to do this dirty deal with us, the Kojo Maroons were sent to Nova Scotia for 4 years, and there's historically recorded that all they did was really complain at how cold it was and asked to go back to Jamaica. Some people got sent back to Jamaica, and some people got sent to Sierra Leone. So I can directly pinpoint from the fact that Nova Scotia shows up on my DNA that we were, in fact, from the Kojo Maroons.
Wow.
It's amazing. That's how ancestors talk to you.
Yeah. I feel like I did get a big smack on the behind that day for sort of saying you need to listen to your grandparents. They're not just talking nonsense. So that was a big thank you from the ancestors. But that was a couple of years of exploring, investigating, jumping into parallel sections of study to find that. So the obia for me,
if you guys have
sorry, go on.
Togo police background and in Benin, then it's highly possible that some of your ancestors also practiced Afa and Vodu, because that's where the Ebe people are. Because the present day Ebe people are in the eastern part of Ghana, Togo, and in Benin, and also some parts of Nigeria, they can also be found.
That's really, really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, when you put it like that, totally. Wow. So, Sena, what advice do you have for listeners who are more than one heritage, or perhaps they are one heritage, but they're living in a different land? How do they honor both their practices and, where they are now?
I would say that the best advice I can give for mixed heritage practitioners or individuals would be just to try their best to invest time and effort to know their roots. I think there's a lot that can come in terms of clarity, confidence, closure, many things that comes from being able to know. And you need to know that you really come in a product of two sides. And there may be sides of you that you don't really like, but then that's also part of who you are, and you have to come to terms with it. You can't love the fruit and hate the tree, and be to terms with that and to make peace with that. It's an important part of accepting your dual heritage. And so I think the best thing they can do is invest the time and try and learn their roots. And as you do that, your ancestors will open the doors, and the people that will give you the right information, the articles that you read, the things that you meet in order to find more information about them will naturally come.
That's excellent advice. I do find actually stumbling across your page on Instagram is very auspicious in and of itself, which is why we've battled to have you on here. so hard, listeners. But this is like before the recording. Yeah, I do find it so auspicious that we stumbled across you, and we were just so delighted to have you here, because I'm going to speak for Nikki. I know what we're both feeling. We're both going to go away and be like hyped up. Like, yeah, we need to get back to, being on our practices, probably a lot heavier than we have been this year. I think, I'm speaking for the both of us, but this year has been quite a turbulent year for both of us. But maybe it's in part because we haven't been as connected as we should, or as we could be.
Oh, babe, it's definitely got a lot to do with that. When things are difficult, if you cannot make the space for your practice, the one thing is going to support you, then things are going to get harder. So yeah, I think this is super inspiring for us. Also, just like talking to somebody of mixed heritage, but also you have something different than what we have, Sena, in that you have a direct link to those lands and those people. Like, your mum is from Japan and you can be with her in Japan, and your dad's from Ghana and you can be with your family in Ghana. And I just feel like it's a really important thing to realize, as somebody of the diaspora, especially if you don't have that connection. Like for me, for example, I don't have my grandparents, my Jamaican grandparents have passed on, my English grandparents have passed on. We're quite, it's kind of just us, and it's quite difficult to find the support of, you know, any kind of authority in that way. But that there still is the potential, if you put the effort in and you want this, to begin to learn African traditional practices, if they're for you, to be able to find your identity and to be able to connect with those places and your ancestors. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for having me. I think it's something that many people are experiencing, you know. And as I said, I think I said that we have a huge wave and a large number of people who are interested in learning more about these indigenous African ways of living and incorporating spiritual life. And they're trying to learn, but it's not easy to find that information. It's very, very difficult to find that information online. It is certainly not something that can just all be written down. But one thing that I want to say, and I really want to emphasize this, is having a teacher, a good teacher, will significantly increase your success and increase your ability to manifest positivity and also harness the full power of these things. It's very difficult to do these things yourself. Even the most sharp knife needs to be sharpened by another knife. It cannot sharpen itself. And so even healers need to be healed by other people. And when we fall sick or things happen to us, we go to other people to heal us too. So it's important to be surrounded by spiritual mentors or elders or teachers, very good ones that you can trust. And when they are involved in your work, what you will be able to achieve, even when in your tough times, you will be able to come out of those hiccups much more quicker and much more stronger, faster than if you're trying to go at it by yourself.
For sure.
That is excellent. That is excellent advice. That is excellent advice. Phew. This has been everything that I've expected and more. I'm so very pleased right now. Is there anything that you're doing right now that you'd like our listeners to know about? Is there anything you want them to know that you're doing, or how to reach out to you?
Yeah, so these days I've been making content in Japan. I recently went to the US last 2 months ago for about 3 weeks. I was in LA, I was in DC, in Baltimore, New York, Vermont, Ohio. So many places in a very short time, but it was a very, very lively trip, a very spiritual trip. So I've been making content about those things and sharing some of my reflections. And so for those that are interested, they can follow me on Instagram. It's at Voncujovi, Voncujovi, Voncujovi. And on Voncujovi, you can see links to our website, YouTube, and all the other things that we've been talking about.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Nicola, do you have any final thoughts?
Everyone go and check out revolution.com, because it's epic. You can see all of Sena's documentaries up there and really understand about the great work that he's doing, opening up the space for these traditions to be continued, especially in Ghana, and also the work that you're doing in Japan, making space for people who are from the African diaspora there. So many amazing things. I actually have like 20 more things I want to ask you and talk to you about, as I feel like always happens. So yeah, expect some messages from me, Sena. But this has just been so enlightening. So it's been so good to talk to you, and I just feel like you've given us a really big gift for our listeners. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me and for your warm hospitality throughout our talk. And I'm glad that we were able to make it to the end finally.
Yay! Celebrate.
We called it. We're like, nothing is gonna happen. We're gonna do it this time, and we did it. So I'm glad.
Yes.
Thank you very much, and please, you know when it's out, and I'd love to.
We will do, my darling.
And we're definitely, like Nicholas said, we are definitely going to be your new biggest botherers.
Yeah.
Please, I want to do more Instagram live sessions where I just answer questions about the practice. So if you guys can tune in sometimes, that would be great. Or we could do a joint live session together if you guys are, if you guys do that kind of stuff as well.
Sena, we would love to do that with you.
We absolutely love to.
Yeah.
We'll set up.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Definitely. Thank you so much, friends, dear listeners, for being here today, joining us in this sorely fought for, brilliant, amazing, mind-blowing conversation. Remember to go and find what makes sense to you culturally and dig deep into that, because honestly, where you're finding the spirituality and the practices of your ancestors and moving forward with that is where you're going to find the magic in your own life, as we like to encourage you to find each week on the Afro Animist podcast. I've been Jay Percy.
And I'm Nicola Roth. And just thanks again to our wonderful guest, Sena Voncujovi.
Woo woo.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
We'll see you all next week. Thanks for listening.
Bye. Thank you, beautiful being of the multiverse, for joining us on the Afro Animist podcast.
If you want to get stuck into the conversation or have a question about anything we speak about here, join our mailing list and find us on our socials.
On TikTok and Instagram, find us at the Afro Animist podcast.
On Twitter, you can find us at Afro Animist. If you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Music, you can also find this talk on YouTube. Just search for us and we will pop up as if by magic.
If you're loving what we're talking about here, share, like, and subscribe. And remember to leave us a thumbs up or 5-star rating on your favourite platform.